creative industries, knowledge economy, and harness its soft power effectively to propel itself forward while championing the inclusion of African voices and the voices of the global Black community in global discourse. Our May edition, titled The Bridge, The Past, the Present, the Future, has been specifically timed to begin on Africa World Heritage Day on May 5th and end on Africa Day, May 25th. Our objective is to establish a celebration of Africa's contemporary industries within wider global conversations, and we'll therefore invite the whole world to join the celebration of May as Africa Month. This session is the business of sports, which explores changing the culture of sports to create access and equity, and seeks to answer these questions. How can we harness our skills to build a sustainable sports ecosystem and industries for the future? What are the opportunities at the intersection of sports, music, and culture, if any? And we will be joined by leading voices in the world of sports: Goabaone, Wale Ogunleye, Emeka Ofodile, and Kwaku Mensah. We're looking forward to their insights and perspectives. The conversation will be led by Michael Eboda, founder and CEO of Powerful Media Group, one of the most respected specialty media businesses in the UK, and we're certain it's going to be a wonderful experience. Michael, over to you. Have a great one, guys.
Thanks, Obi. Hello and welcome. My name is Michael Eboda, and on this edition of Africa Soft Power series, as you just heard, we are talking about the business of sport. Actually, when we talk about the business of sport, perhaps we should just say we're talking about business, because that's what it's become. To demonstrate this fact, all you need to do is look at a couple of recent news items. For example, the European Super League that was all over the news only a couple of weeks ago was an attempt by some of the biggest football clubs in Europe to form a breakaway league that would feature only themselves. Each club was promised a £300 million signing on fee, but it failed because the greed of the clubs led them to overlook the sentiment of the fans. And we'll be having a look at how that panned out in a minute. Then only yesterday, we learned that the former UFC champion, Conor Mcgregor, was the highest earning sports star in the world last year, with an annual income of $180 million, despite the fact that he only had one fight last year, which he lost. He actually made the money after selling a whiskey brand called Proper 12 that he had invested in. Despite the pandemic, which has severely restricted sport over the past years, there were 3 other athletes in the top 10 who cracked the $100 million mark. That's $100 million in sport. There's Lionel Messi, probably not surprisingly. Cristiano Ronaldo, again, maybe we're not that surprised. And Dallas Cowboys quarterback Dak Prescott made up the third. And finally, yesterday, we learned that the TV rights for the Premier League have been sold again for £4.5 billion, £4.5 billion to watch football. It is indeed, sport is indeed a business. And to talk about it, I'm joined by a very, very eminent panel indeed. Goabaone, the CEO of Botswana Football Association, joins us alongside Wale Ogunleye, who was a former NFL defensive end, now head of sports and entertainment at the investment bank UBS. Emeka Ofodile, who's the vice president of sports marketing at ESPN, and Kwaku Mensah, who is the executive director of the sports agency Premier Sports Talent. Now, let's start with football. Big business, certainly, but are the numbers that we are now seeing sustainable going forward? Kwaku, could you start for us, please?
Of course, no problem. Thanks a lot, Michael, and thanks a lot for having me. And it's a real pleasure and honor to be around this illustrious panel. What's the question? Are the numbers sustainable? I don't know. Probably not. I mean, it's an incredible amount of money, 4 billion. Is there an appetite for football? Yes. So the single biggest viewed thing on television in the world is the World Cup final. I think is it a fifth of the world watch Premier League every weekend. So is it sustainable in the exact same numbers? Possibly not, but is it justifiable that there's this amount of money? You could probably argue that it is, because as you said, sport is a business. It's not just what goes on the pitch, it's what goes on with the advertising, it's what goes on with the image rights. It's everything around it, I'd say.
Yeah, but you're one of the people who brings money into sport.
I am.
I mean, in the sense that, you know, and some would argue that you also take money out of sport, because, you know, you're an agent for a number of sports people, and you manage a number of sports people. How far do you think we can go when you're negotiating contracts for your guys? How do you know how far to go?
I think, you know what they say, you get what you negotiate, right? But something is worth what the value of the buyer puts on it, right? So it's not about how far we can go. It's how much does the club value the player, which they see as an asset. The player generates an incredible amount of money for the club. The club does it. What are you selling rights to? You're selling rights to the players running around the pitch, right? So yeah. The value is where? The value is in the players. So it's an interesting question. How do you know how far to go? I think you do what's fair. You go with what you really believe is an appropriate value for what the player brings and has done for the club. How many shirts do they sell? How big is their following on social media? How many goals do they score? How many fans do they bring to the stadium? How much joy do they bring? Obviously, football is a real important thing. In the middle of a pandemic, we had to find a way of getting the game back on when all other industries weren't even working, because it's important to, people have said, you know, it's important to the spirit of the country in the UK here where I am, and of course, across the continent of Africa where we call football a religion. So I think the value is in, I think the athletes themselves are where the value is. And as long as they're bringing enjoyment to the fans, and as long as they respect that, and as long as they give back to the fans, I think we should be in a good place.
We're blessed this evening with a really international panel. Wale, you're based in the States, and you work with athletes in the States. How do you see the business of sport in America? Is it thriving as it is in Europe, or is there some concern that there's that it's a bubble that's waiting to burst?
No, I think it's thriving. I think at the end of the day, with the pandemic, we've realized that there's some things that society will not live without, and sports was one of those things. They found ways to entertain the masses, which has been from the beginning of time to now. Athletes have found ways to entertain communities, countries, societies in holiday time, in times of leisure. And also the thing about sports, which, you know, me being a former player, I realized it's one of the unifying things for countries, unifying things for communities, for families. I remember playing in a Super Bowl, I think in 2006, I believe. And in that year, you know, I played in Chicago. And that year, you know, I went out, and any restaurant I went to, I couldn't even pull out my credit card. Everything was paid for. Look through the stadiums, and you talk about seeing different cultures, seeing mom with her son or dad with her daughter. You see Spanish, Black, white, like different, everyone together in these stadiums. And then you realize that this is really what the business of sports is. It's really a time to unite people, put their thoughts of work and stresses behind them. And this is the one thing that they want for themselves. So I see the business of sports continuing to thrive. There will be stresses and headwinds like pandemics that may try to test the resilience of the sports industry, but the fans what the fans want, and they want to be entertained. And as long as they are the drivers of the dollars that are being spent, I don't see this going away anytime soon.
And I'm going to draft off that because I think you put it well. The business of sport is going to thrive, but what's super interesting about sports is this idea, it's the game and it's the game around the game, right? And the industry around sort of what's happening on the field. And I think what's super interesting about sports now is that you're seeing an expansion of the industry that is surrounding sort of the game. So for example, like sports betting, right? 5 years ago, maybe that was not a thing. Now it's a thing and it's going to continue to become a thing, right? You're seeing more intersections, sprout up around the game. So for example, sport and wellness, right? Like the training aspect of sport. So I actually think in the next number of years, you're going to see more ways in terms of to be able to monetize sport than you might have seen in the last 5 years. So I actually think it's going to expand, but it's going to be built around sort of the game that we all know.
Yeah, that's incredible. Gwaba, Africa. Where does Africa come in on this? You're the CEO of the Botswana Football Association. Of course, when they were talking about the Super League in Europe, one of the markets that they were targeting was Africa. They were looking at Asia, they were looking at Africa, they were looking at the US, but Africa was definitely one of those markets. How does that affect local football on the continent?
First of all, let me just say thank you for having me here. But I think, when you look at international sport versus what we're trying to do as associations, yes, that's a big threat because, our role as the FAs in the countries that we operate in is first to try and promote the game, our national teams locally. So we can see that, football is global and we should be able to support anybody that we want to. But now, for me, my function is to try and make sure that as we, follow the international game as well, have the aspiration to also want to follow the national team. So it's a big challenge for us because, we are competing with big budgets, really. We are competing with big inventories that, it becomes easy for them to get sponsors as you would at a national level to be able to compete in the international stage. So it is one of those things that, it's exciting, we like it. But when you look at what I'm overseeing as a CEO of an FA, is, how am I going to compete with this big brand that's now coming into my space? Because, yes, football is global, but we need to be able to coexist in that space.
And the ownership of football teams across the African continent, generally, they tend to be owned by wealthy owners or by sort of corporations, right? How do you work with those constraints when it comes to keeping the best players on the continent and, increasing the standards, I suppose, of the sport in your country?
Well, you see, for us in Botswana, we are still, I think, a bit behind in terms of getting our players out. So we're more focusing right now more at the development stage, just to try and increase the level of participation, because we do acknowledge that as a country, Botswana, we are not yet at the performance stage where we can be able to take a lot more players out. Not to say that is not our objective, but to say that, we need to try and drive more of the participation, try and grow the numbers that are in football first. And as you grow that, try and also look at the inventories to say, once we develop this quality of sportsmen, how are we going to now position them in the international stage to be able to be adopted or be signed up and be out there and perform and represent the country? So for me, I would be, I think, a bit biased towards the Botswana position, because I know the West Africa is doing quite well in terms of taking their players out, but I can only speak about what's happening in my space.
Yeah, thank you. Going back to the guys who are US-based, Wale and Emeka, in Europe, what we've seen, I think, is that the ownership profile of the bigger sports clubs, and we're talking about football clubs here, it seems to work when you have a wealthy owner who's not interested in making a profit. So, i.e., a Roman Abramovich at a Chelsea, or the owners of Manchester City, which essentially is the Emirates itself. In America, though, we have a different system, this franchise sort of system. Do American franchises make money? Sports franchises, do they make money in the US? You're laughing. So I clearly do, that they make a lot of money.
Oh yeah, they make tons of money. From what I understand with the American systems, the leagues have done a good job of revenue sharing. So even though there may be a team that hasn't won a championship in a long period of time, the revenue sharing allows teams that are not really good to still have a balance sheet at the end of the day that's always in the green, right? They've always made some money. Also, these teams, like let's say the owner of the Dallas Cowboys, Jerry Jones, is allowed to have his own marketing behind the Dallas Cowboys, and he's able to benefit from being innovative in the way that he markets his team to his local market. We talked about the Premier League, and I think you said it's $4 billion. $4 billion. Yeah,
TV rights.
TV rights for the Americans. Football, they just signed collectively over the next, I think, 10, 11 years, over $100 billion deal in just for football alone for over the next 10 years. So it's very lucrative deal. They're making a lot of money. And you're starting to see the players start to benefit from these bigger deals, and you're seeing bigger contracts from the players. But the owners in American sports have long and will continue to make big money. And you're actually seeing some of these owners that have American sports teams causing some of the trouble that's going on in Europe with those owners. They're the ones causing this. Let's show you how to make more money at having these leagues. So I would blame a little bit of our American businessmen on some of the headwinds that the Europe League is having right now.
But should it all be about money? I'm going to throw this open to whoever wants to answer it. Should sport really be about money, or should it be about competition? Should it be about human being against human being to see who the best is?
Michael, for me, I don't think it should be about money. We should first look at the performance and see how we can incorporate performance into giving value back. Because you see that, I think what has been happening, especially in other markets, is that we don't try and bring out the value that you are giving to the buyer or the investor in sport. But if we can build our athletes to a level where when we now start to promote them and sell them or sell any inventory that we have, we can be able to show value that we are giving back into the investor. Then that way, everybody wins, because Wale was speaking about the sharing. That's why now the sharing becomes easy, because you would have built how that money, how those gains are going to be shared, because it's not necessarily just money only, but it's just how do you then share the gains going forward?
I think it's also a question when you say, is it about money? Obviously, this panel is called The Business of Sport, and business is about money, right? So that's what we're actually here to talk about. So sport is about performance. Sport, you learn so many things from sport. You learn how to be a team player, how to take defeat, how to train, how to take yourself seriously, dedicate your life. And there's all sorts of amazing things you get from sport. You don't need to do that at a professional level to get those things. People play, Sunday league football and work in a different industry because you get all of these amazing health benefits and life benefits from being part of sport. But being part of organized sport, obviously it's a business, and the role of a business is to make money. And I think the question for us here is, how is Africa benefiting from the business of sport? I think that's the question, not is it about money or is it about sport?
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're really trying to find out.
But I think
we want to explore and celebrate, right?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I actually think sort of the definition in my head is like sports, yes, it's about money, it's about competition, but at the end of the day, sports is about community, right? That's what sports does better than anything else, right? Once you can achieve that community through whether your teammates, whether it's your family, whether it's bigger followings, whether it's the local team, if you can find that and build that, then all of the rest, the money comes, right? And I think, when you think about sports, one of the main reasons people watch sports is that they can watch it with their friends, right? They can watch it with their family, right? So like at the end of the day, like we need to think about how we building community through sport, right? Then once you do that, then I think the rest can come. So we shouldn't forget that sports is about community.
I think
let me add to this though. I think we've got to use what we have in front of us. So I say this to say, I agree with you about it should be community. But one thing I do think, especially with African people and people from marginalized regions and communities, sometimes we tend to be okay with circumstances as long as we're giving back, right? And just everyone is benefiting, right? And that in itself makes it almost says that we can't do both equally, right? Why can't we be great businessmen, but also benefit our communities at the same time? Because at the end of the day, whether we're taking the money and bringing it within our own communities, someone will make money off of sports. So why not take the mentality of it's a business, and it's a business that's continuing to grow, but do two things at the same time. Have it be community, but still be on top of your business. And that's the biggest thing that gets athletes in trouble, is a sense of, I'm just doing this for the love of the game, which is great, but you're making someone billions of dollars at the same time. So we have to find a way that we can do both and not be ashamed of making money off of our talents and making money off of and making sure that the people around us are also benefiting from the things we just talked about with these it's not even billion, it's trillions of dollar industry in sports. So why not take the business approach and then also what have the community mind in the same time, in the same sense.
So just to follow on
Okay.
what Wale just said, what I think is really important is that we have to make sure this next generation that are coming up understand that sport doesn't end on the field, right? Because we can't just be creating footballers and basketball players and runners. We have to be creating CEOs and team owners and CEOs of federations like our sister on here. That's what we have to be providing. That's what we have to be creating, because otherwise all we're going to do is create the guy who runs on the track, and as Wale just said, somebody else is making billions while he may make millions and then lose it at the end of his career. And so the focus has to understand that there's an entire massive industry around sport. There's the grounds, there's the advertising, there's the food, there's the insurance. The amount of parents who say to me, well, my son plays football and that's what he wants to do, but I wish he was a lawyer or a doctor. Do you know how much sports lawyers charge? You can be a lawyer in sport. You can be a sports doctor. You can be a sports accountant. All of these traditional things that as Africans we always really respect also exist in the industry of sport. And when people start understanding sport is a business and it does make lots of people money, as well as making people happy, we'll be in a better place. And we need to be directing so that every time we create an athlete, we're also creating his manager, we're also creating his lawyer, we're also creating his doctor, and maybe the team owner as well, so that, you know, we own an industry.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. I mean, look, we see, and across all sports right now, we're seeing a lot more African names as superstars. So even in the NFL, I mean, you see a lot more African names nowadays than probably you used to. Of course, professional football in Europe, there are African superstars in pretty much every European league. The real question about that, though, is we're exporting a talent, right? A lot of that talent is exported from Africa. How does that value go back to the continent and benefit communities within the continent? Anybody can take that up.
I mean, if you know anything about African football, and you can compare it to European football, if you compare a Sadio Mane to an Erling Haaland, whatever Erling Haaland earns, probably for him and his family. What Sadio Mane earns is going to be for him, his extended family, his community, his village, the school he went to when he was 2 or 3, the auntie that, you know, gave him his first pair of football boots. So in terms of it going back, almost every single African athlete I know has that community mind where they're trying to, you know, athletes are always building tracks in their home villages or pitches in their home villages, because they're always trying to give back this journey into professional sport that they got into their communities. So I think a lot of the athletes themselves are this way minded, but without a full support system around them, governmental, governing body, to actually really support and encourage that. You know, what are we teaching in schools about sport, about the other aspects of sport that we've talked about? You know, these things I think would actually help make a bigger impact for a more sustainable future for sport on the continent. And it's not just we're exporting raw materials like every other business that happens in Africa. We export the raw material into the West. It would be fantastic if Botswana had a thriving league. You didn't need to be looking at trying to send your players out of Botswana, right? It would be amazing if they could earn an amazing career in life, living at home and not having to leave their families for 9 months of the year.
Yeah, you see, that's very true. But when you look at how the structure of the FA is, for example, and how we're trying to refocus, is to try and build from the grassroots. Because when you build from the grassroots, you are working with the communities, you know, and that's how the athlete will sort of move and grow over time. And that value will come back in terms of in the aspect of the club licensing, for example, in the football space. If you can have an athlete that is signed into a club that is, you know, also complying with all the statutory and governance issues of sport, then that's how the community can be able to get gains later on when our athlete now becomes an international performer. So this is why for us as FAs, it's important that we start from the grassroots and try and build participation. So that by the time that athlete now is an elite athlete or an elite footballer, there is those gains that can trickle down back into the communities.
I also think, you know, what's super interesting about the role of the athlete today versus maybe 10 or 15 years ago, the role of the athlete is fundamentally changed, right? And I think that you know, sort of the emergence of social media, there's never been more opportunities to get your voice and influence out into the space than now. And I think what is incredibly important, and how do you create change, is that athletes need to use their voice. They need to use their platforms, and they need to use their platforms to amplify voices that are not heard, you know, underrepresented groups and issues that, you know, need support. And they need to do it while they're at the height of sort of, their athletic careers, and also commit to that as they obviously transition out of it. So I think it's this idea of like, can sports play a leadership role in society? That's the fundamental question. And what's the role athletes, need to play, and how should they use their platform to advance some of this stuff?
And I'll add too, I think that societally, we need to go back to, what my brother was talking about earlier, talking about the community of sports, right? The truth of the matter is, I don't care how good we may think our young men and women are on the pitch or on the field or on the basketball court. There's only a certain amount of positions on these teams, whether it be the NFL, Premier League. Everyone is probably less than 1% of people who start to pick up a soccer ball or a football or a baseball or a basketball will ever make it professionally. Are other parts within the sports industry that are available, like attorneys, financial advisors, managers, lawyers, doctors. There's a whole ecosystem in sports business. And what athletes that do make it need to use their voices, like we've said, like everyone on the panel have said, and express that education really should be the driving force of getting out of the position that you're in, or the driving force of trying to be successful. And then if God is willing and your talents are there and you meet the right opportunities, there's a chance for you to make it professional. Too many times our young men and women think, and sometimes society makes this happen, that this is the only way out, and I'm going to make it by all means necessary. I have to make it to the pitch. The probability of you making it to the pitch, if anyone making it to the pitch, slim to none. So let's be realistic as a community. Athletes need to do a better job of uplifting that ecosystem around them, making it more attractive to be the lawyer that handles my business dealings, or be the trainer, the physio that gets me in shape, and they make a decent amount of money. But I get, there's the emphasis of the athlete and the fan aspect of it. But again, society, we need to do a better job of talking about the business of sports. And there's so many things behind, and so many people behind the curtain that are making a decent amount of money in sports and are just not the athlete on the field. So as an athlete, for me, a former athlete, I want to advocate for those different sectors within the sports industry, knowing that when I go speak to these young men and women and I'm looking into them and I'm seeing the hunger, that I know the chances of them making professional are slim to none. So I don't want to lie to them. And I think it's up to the athletes not to take away their dreams, but at least say, hey, listen, what's the real plan? And let this be the backup plan. But what's your real plan of making it? And then let's be realistic with that.
So Wale, so what was it that made you and helped you transition from a top player to a top investment banker who looks after athletes and sports stars?
Yeah, great question. I think it's some of the things we talked about is community. It's always been involved in my life. I felt like this might be the best step to give back, in a sense where, I've played 11 years and made a decent amount of money, but, just having that, community of giving back built in me from my parents. Number two, my parents always wanted me to be a lawyer or a doctor. So I felt like if I went and got my master's degree, this might be a better step for them. They were okay with the football player, but education was still super high. Like my sister's proud, she's a doctor. So she's actually probably gets the biggest piece of chicken in the house because of her doctorate degree. So I wanted to, expand my education, still wanted to make my family proud. And I think this was a way of kind of bringing everything together, knowing that the athletes and the financial industry does a really bad job of looking after their clients. Too many of our advisors are fans of the players and not really advocates or partners in it. And it's almost like next man up. It's all transactional. How much money can you make off of this athlete? And I felt like my new position, I'm able to have real relationships, understand who our clients are, who our players are, and why it's important for them to be successful financially and off the field, just as it was for me to be successful on the field.
Yeah, and that kind of segues quite nicely into looking at the players themselves, the sports stars themselves, and the fact that, yeah, you've got a relatively short career here. Most sports stars are done by the time they're 32, 33 years old, right? And certainly in professional football, a lot of those stars end up with literally no money at all. But we see the stories all the time. We see the stories of bankrupt former sports stars all the time. Whose duty is it to ensure that that doesn't happen? In sports that generates, as we're talking about, this trillions and trillions of dollars, surely the duty must fall upon somebody to make sure that the practitioners who make that money and who create that wealth are themselves looked after over the long term. Kwaku, have you got any thoughts on this?
Oh yeah, this is a very pertinent part of my work, and as you said, I've seen, you know, players who have made lots of money, millions, who then weren't able to look after themselves financially in the right way, and then are in a quite distressing situation. Not even, you know, a decade after they stopped playing. You know, maybe 2, 3, 4 years, and it's quite shocking sometimes. Your first question, whose responsibility? I mean, you'd like to think it would be, you know, the teams and the franchises and the leagues, the people who are the custodians of the sport to make sure, you know, there are insurances put in place and there's financial education that every kid. See, the US is different. So I know Emeka and Wale, you guys get scholarships to university and you hang around with, you play college sports and everything. And so some of your friends, by the time you finish, are already talking about investments and stuff. Football in Europe is different. You know, kids drop out of school at 14, 15, pretty much. They might sometimes finish their education to 16, 18, but really not really. You know, they're really focused on sport, and then they're thrust into an environment where everybody else around them is the same. So you've got a bunch of, and obviously girls too, but I work predominantly with male players. You've got a bunch of young guys who are 17 or 18 who all dropped out of school at 15 or 16, surrounded around each other, and they're making those kind of decisions around each other. And then you have people who can also exploit them. So the responsibility ideally should be on the leagues, but it should be on everybody. So my approach with players, and I try and start them very, very young from the moment I start working with them, is I say, look, the team, the league is going to see you as a commodity. I mean, while you're a professional player, were you traded before? Right? Right? You trade commodities, right? That's, you don't trade human beings, you know, it's not I think that was meant to stop in 1865, right? But so the idea is, if the team is going to see you as a commodity, you need to see yourself as a commodity and own yourself. And if you view yourself that way from a very young age, where you're your own commodity, you own yourself, you invest in yourself, and you value yourself. One of the challenges I have in our industry is we don't talk about trade in football, soccer. We say you were bought and sold, literally. You know, the club bought the player and sold the player. And it's one of my pet hates. I'm always fighting, saying, do not say you were bought and sold. You know, you were employed, you were transferred. They gave you a contract. If we can change this language and change how the person sees himself, then it gives him the ability to ask the people around him, well, this is my commodity that I'm investing in, that's important to everybody around here. What are you doing to invest in our commodity together? What are you doing to help lengthen my career? Are you inviting me out to clubs? Are you helping me sleep? What are we eating? All of these kind of things. Everybody in the family needs to see this commodity, that it's our shared commodity that we must invest in. And then that helps with the advice, because otherwise it's the other way where people actually see this person as a cash cow, and they're literally, we're creatures of habit, human beings. So if you're used to receiving a certain amount of money from a player for 5 or 6 years, even though he finished playing and he's not earning that same amount of money, you're still expecting to receive that money 5 or 6 years after he's playing. So sorry if I went around and around in the answer, but there's so many aspects of this which is really close to my heart, because it's a shame that you have a career that's only 14, maybe 15 years long if you're really at the top level and really fit, and you have to try to earn enough money and make enough investments to see you through to 70, 80, and your children and your grandchildren. And if you do it in the right way, your grandchildren are looked after. And if you're not, it's a problem.
I think you well said, and I think Wale also sort of said this as well, is like, for athletes while they're playing, I think it's important to have this mindset. I think LeBron James is sort of the one that coined this idea of more than an athlete, right? Thinking about yourself that way, because then you're leveraging your playing career not only to get to the highest point in terms of performance and competition, but you're also leveraging your playing career to help you pursue those passions that you might be interested in. Perfect example right now is Kevin Durant, right? Kevin Durant is investing in multiple businesses as he's at the height of what he's doing. So he's thinking about himself not only in the present, but also in the post. And I think the responsibility, to some degree, yes, comes from the camp that surrounds that athlete, but it has to be authentic to that individual athlete, right? Those passions, how they see themselves in terms of what they want to ultimately pursue. Because if it's not authentic, it's not going to stick, right? So, so my whole point is this idea of more than an athlete. I think you're seeing a whole new generation of athletes sort of thinking that way, which then should help in that sort of transition, in that post, which is always one of the most difficult times for athletes, that transition that they have to make.
Yeah, they need to be thinking
Kwaba,
early, right?
Just going to go back to Kwaba. In Africa, I guess these are not things that you particularly have to worry about. But do you see athletes that do come back to kind of to show the young ones over there that what is possible? Do you see like some experienced athletes who are maybe from Botswana, for example, come back to the country and give back by showing kids the way forward there? Or is that something that's not actually happening yet?
Michael, I wish this is one of the things that I think when I joined the FA, I sort of looked at to say, but where are these people that we used to watch or we used to hear about? And I think, sometimes because of not instilling in yourself where you are going to be post the game, you'll find that, because you have not positioned yourself to come and give back or to come and do more post the being an athlete, you'll find that, then there isn't much activity that you see after the person has been in the international stage or has achieved their personal best. So it's a bit disappointing and I think also frustrating, because for the FA, we are trying to build, and we can't build alone. We need to have inspirational players that have been out there that can come and help us to build the grassroots. And it's one of the things that we are trying to build into, to say, can we just go and find our legends and try and work with them? Because yes, Botswana may not have that many, but the number we have is good enough to help the FA to try and build and give back into the communities and grow, so that one day when we talk about performance and not just participation, we can have a lot more of our athletes performing and being in the international stage out there.
I want to ask Waba one question also. There's a lot of African players here in the United States in diaspora, right? And they want to come back to the continent and do something. There is a sense of the bureaucracy that comes with the governments in Africa, especially from Nigeria, where I'm from, there tends to be a lot of red tape involved. How do you suggest, or would you say, to get around some of this bureaucracy and to actually get on the ground and do the good that they want to do without it being, you know, a lot of wahala, like I would say, a lot of troubles that come our ways when we try to do that?
Yeah, you see, one of the things I can maybe just now give big ups to my employer in that I'm not from the football space. I'm from the business side of I know more business than I know sport, right? Mm-hmm. But you'll see that the minute we start to bring in business people that can come and help us to build the foundation of the business of sport, then maybe that way we can start to have that transparency being out, because then you deal with issues of governance. Then you'll deal very well with the issues of even the people that are working in the FA, understanding that they're not working for themselves, they're working to serve the player and to serve the nation. Then that way, you know, it becomes easy for those that are in the diaspora to have an interest to want to come back. So it's one challenge that I have, and I think other GSs out there have in other FAs, that how do we bring back our players from where they are to come and want to work with us? So it's a challenge we have, but it has to do first with dealing with our governance structures, making sure that, because when you look at FIFA, for example, FIFA has very straightforward statutes and governance that needs to be followed. But we choose as countries and FAs to sometimes, you know, maybe overstep or maybe ignore. So it starts first with us to build that structure, to build that foundation, and try and bring back everybody that we can work with to work with.
Yeah, and presumably, of course, if you're coming back from the West with the sort of money that some of these guys have earned, I mean, you could do some absolutely incredible things on the African continent, couldn't you?
Absolutely, absolutely, because you know our players do very well out there. They do. I mean, and here I'm speaking about Africa as a whole. They do very well, but we as the countries and the communities, we don't get as much. And sadly, it's governance. It's the basis and the structures that we have in our countries that we need to sort of try and work on, and making sure that, you know, it attracts everybody, not just the sponsor, but also those that can come and do a lot more.
That's really interesting. Has anybody else got anything to add to that? Kwaku, I know you spoke about, you know, the fact that a lot of your guys, they give back almost in a sort of family kind of a way. Do you encourage them to invest on the continent?
When I spoke, I wasn't talking necessarily just my guys. I was saying African footballers, or African
generally,
all give back to a bigger community. It's just a prerequisite of who they are and how we're wired as people. It just happens. Yeah, in terms of investments, I encourage my guys to invest in sound investments. But one of the important things is being able to inspire the next generation to follow. So we get involved in a lot of different things. We get involved in, you know, building pitches and building schools, and, you know, we've got a big thing for, I can't actually say what it is. All right, we have a big thing for, how do I put it? A social impact thing happening with one of the guys. But I encourage all of my players to be involved in Africa as much as possible, be that where possible playing for their national team, or being involved on the ground in building back aspects of infrastructure and stuff like that. It's a duty to us. It's not even a discussion. It's just is what it is.
But are they taking that up? Are they actually getting involved, just out of interest, please?
Oh yeah, like we are involved in lots of different projects. As I said, there's some things that are happening that I can't talk about, but you can look at there's a pitch that's been built. A couple of pitches have been built in Ghana. There's an academy that's being put together in Ivory Coast. These guys start with the areas that they know, but then they move into other. Some of these guys have hotels. A couple of the guys we have a couple of hotels in Ghana, and they employ hundreds of people. Sometimes thousands of people. They impact they start. Most of these guys just naturally start within their community that they came from, and then build out from there, which I think makes sense, right?
Yeah, no, it really does. Wale and Emeka, is it that sentiment in the US? Because in the UK and Europe, we do have a very close relationship, by and large, across the diaspora, certainly into our sort of home countries within Africa. Do you see that at all in the US, or is it sort of more of a kind of like, Wale, you asked a question earlier, how do we get involved with that?
Yeah, no, I see it a lot. I mean, again, this is just, even though we've been away from the continent for a long time, our families and parents do a good job of instilling the traditions of Africa in us. Our names are not similar to the American names that we go to school with here. So it's not difficult to know that you come from a different culture. And that sense of wanting to give back, it's not if it happens, it's when it happens in your career. So eventually you're going to want to go back to the roots, right? Get back to the places that made you who you are. So the reason why I asked that question is in my own personal dealings of coming back and bringing, players back to Africa. It does seem for us to be a bit disorganized in the sense of we're not sure who to trust. We don't know who really has the real boots on the ground in Africa. And that tends to understand that the way they do business in America with philanthropic endeavors is totally different than the way business is done in Africa. And some of that can be off-putting. So the reason why I asked that question was, how do we get to a place where the athletes in the West can get into Africa, because they're making lots of money. Our last two NBA MVPs is Giannis. This year maybe Joel Embiid, another African-born player. The NFL is filled with Nigerians and Africans that are exploding within the sport. And the storylines continue to happen, like, hey, we're African players, but no one actually knows how to really do the philanthropic business in Nigeria or in Africa without it being a headache, without it saying, you've got to you want to build a school? Well, then you got to build me a school here too. And I'm looking like, I have to build you a school? Like, you're telling me I have to build you a school in your name, in your village, when I want to go work here? So those are the kind of things that are off-putting, and people get afraid of that dealing. So there is a sense of us wanting to do exactly what we've talked about, but it's just hard to know who's really, doing the right things and push us in the right direction.
Yeah. So Goabaone, I think there's some really interesting work for you guys to look at doing there.
Very true. No, I was just agreeing with you that very true. There's quite a lot we need to do, and we'll start digging and doing a bit more.
Then we Guava, that means you're going to be the point person for us then. So we run everything through you now. From now on, we know we can trust you. So we're good.
Awesome.
Okay, great.
Look, we're rapidly running out of time. So I did want to touch upon one other thing, and again, going back to the original theme of this, about this being about business in sport. The biggest sporting event in the world is the Olympics. And in just a few weeks, quite literally, we are supposed to be seeing an Olympic Games in Tokyo. And I want to ask each of you, look, a lot of people have been criticizing the fact that there's not going to be any crowds there. It's going to be an awful experience for the athletes. And that the only reason that everybody is saying it should go ahead is because of money, because of the amount of money that the organizers potentially could lose if it doesn't happen. Can I ask each of you what you think about that? Should the Olympics go ahead? Kwaku, you start.
To be honest, I really don't know. In terms of, I'm not aware of what kind of safety procedures and mechanisms have been put in place in Japan. I can understand why they definitely want to put it on after missing it last year. I can understand from the point of athletes, because Olympic athletes, it's a real hard life, because you spend 4 years of your life working towards one thing that can define your life forever, and then it doesn't happen. There were a lot of athletes which the 2020 Olympics was going to be their last Olympics. So they've literally sacrificed everything in their life, their health, their family, having kids, whatever else, to get to this. And then it was moved because of COVID. So from an athlete's point of view, I can understand a desire, and obviously I work closely with athletes much more than governing bodies. I can understand the desire to get there and to make it happen, to put on the show if they're safe. From a human point of view, they had a big, massive boxing fight that Canelo fought the other day with 70,000 people in the crowd. So if there's a potential for people to be safe and the right measures to be put in place and people quarantine, they've had the tennis events are going on, football's back, the NBA is happening in the Disney bubble. So they've had a year to prepare, and Japan is one of the most organized countries in the world. So hopefully everything's put in place so people can be safe and the event can go on.
I think,
Wale?
Go ahead, Wale.
No, Emeka, go ahead.
I don't have much to add on that. What I will say is that I'll just finish up and I'll let the last two stars finish the point on this. But I agree. I just think as long as everything is safe, let's get it. The Olympics, are special memories for me. I know every 4 years the music around it, so when I hear that the theme songs of the Olympics, I have a sense of nostalgia that kicks in. But again, imagine being an athlete that has trained for the last 3-4 years, or maybe your whole lifetime, to make it to this point and not being able to perform has to be very disappointing. But again, as long as everyone's safe and can be done properly, I hope it can go off well.
Yeah, I agree with that. And also, I think one of the viewpoints that we should think about it's the athlete. I recall just on the state side here with college football, Justin Fields, quarterback for Ohio State, the Big Ten wasn't going to play the college football season, but the athletes came together and sort of said, hey, we want to play. Like we want to play this year. So I think you have to really weigh how the athletes feel about this. And also the last point, is that we have to look at the Olympics bigger than the business of sport. I think the Olympics means it's as much a human story than sort of a business story. And so, I think we just have to think about the Olympics that way versus, thinking about it just from a business level alone.
Gwaba, can we get the final word from you on this?
Yes, I agree with my brothers definitely that, it's not about business here. It's about the sports person. And if we can just guarantee them the safety, then for me, we should proceed. And with, I'm just going to wrap up with what was being said, that they've had so much time to prepare. So much money has been invested into the Olympics. So it should be possible to still proceed. It's just a matter of diverting the funds to make sure that, we can guarantee that safety, to make sure that we can bring the game out or the performance out, because these are people that have worked so hard to be here. And if they can tell us that they're ready, then yes, maybe they are ready.
Right, and on that note, I think we're going to come to an end with this. We've run out of time. The thing about sport is that you can talk about it quite literally forever and a day. And usually, actually, people don't agree. So I think having this fantastic panel this evening, one of the things that has happened is that most of you have agreed with one another, particularly in terms of the growth and the potential for growth of sport in Africa and among the African diaspora around the world. I'd like to thank the panel. I'd like to thank everybody who's listening. All that remains for me to say is good night and goodbye.
Wow. Bye. Thank you, everybody. We're just gonna just do a quick thanks to all our viewers. It was very nice to have you guys here. Thanks to the speakers. It was like a dream having this conversation. Obi, do you want to say anything? You're the sports guru in the room.
No, I'm just really happy to see the conversation and to see the group together, and just feeling that just keep this energy going, because I think there's a point that Wale made, which is about how can we build transparent platforms that our diaspora talent can feed into, because as he said, we have enormous global power, but we need to sort of feed back into a platform that enables us to raise up the continent as well. So thanks a lot, everybody. Great conversation. Michael, great moderation, man. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. And look forward to being in touch with everybody. Thanks so much for being here.
All right, guys. And you know what? We should all stay in touch in some way, shape, or form. Right?
100%.
Can we share details and stuff?
We will. We are connected by email. So yeah, everybody has everybody's details. So yes,
anybody who's in social media wants to be followed can put their stuff in the chat. Maybe that might be helpful for anybody who's in social media. I don't know. Beyond that, beyond that, we're good.
I just got a message through from Manchester United talking about the season ticket for next season. Literally right now.
You're the enemy. You're the enemy.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks for this. Good night.
Good night.
Thanks. Have a good evening.
Join our next panel. We have a panel at 6:30. Join, please. It's